What is up, Star Wars fans? This is Darth Watts, and in this video, we're going to be talking about Star Wars The Last Jedi and how much inspiration did it took up from George Lucas's sequel trilogy treatments that he handed over to Disney, as well as the problems that people had with The Last Jedi. And I'm going to have to say the problems that people had with The Last Jedi, and this is from the majority of the fandom, saying that the way that Luke Skywalker was portrayed, the way that Snoke was killed off before ever getting to know the character, or Leia, kind of like what a lot of people think it's that Mary Poppins stuff. But I disagree. It's just Leia using the Force to bring herself back to the ship. And a lot of people didn't like the fact that Luke Skywalker died in The Last Jedi. Well, here's something that's already been confirmed a couple years ago is that George Lucas's sequel trilogy treatments had also had Luke Skywalker dying in episode 8. That was confirmed by Pablo Hidalgo. And the way Luke Skywalker was portrayed was not Johnson's or J.J. Abrams' idea or Disney or Lucasfilm's idea. It was George Lucas's idea himself. If you actually go back to the 2012 concept art that's in The Art of the Force Awakens that shows an older exiled Luke Skywalker haunted by the betrayal of one of his apprentices, former apprentices, his nephew, who turns against him, destroys it all, destroys the Jedi Order, and Luke Skywalker goes into exile. That was actually Lucas's idea, and it doesn't only precede Johnson's involvement, but J.J. Abrams' involvement as well. And a fun fact: The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi had George Lucas more involved than The Rise of Skywalker. And The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi did indeed take up the most inspiration from what George Lucas had in his treatments. But The Last Jedi in the entire trilogy took up the most of it when this whole concept of Kira, and this was described in The Art of the Last Jedi, where Kira eventually finds Luke, but originally what was originally supposed to happen is that episode 7 was supposed to focus on finding Luke Skywalker, but not only finding Luke Skywalker, but convincing him to do something about the fight. But at the end of The Force Awakens, it left on a cliffhanger with Luke Skywalker and Rey handing the lightsaber to Luke Skywalker. But the original ending wasn't supposed to end that way. And both the events in The Last Jedi of Rey convincing Luke Skywalker to get out of his depression and do something about the fight was actually stuff that was left out of The Force Awakens. And that would have made it into the final cut of The Force Awakens if George Lucas made it. But it is what it is, and J.J. Abrams is a director that loves to leave a lot of mystery boxes, which I feel like The Force Awakens left way too many mystery boxes, which led to way too much speculation. But also, I don't get why people are so mad at Rian Johnson and calling Rian Johnson Ruin Johnson, because a lot of the stuff, if you actually pay attention to what's actually in writing about the characters from The Force Awakens, a lot of that was set up in The Last Jedi. A lot of the stuff in The Last Jedi was already set up in The Force Awakens. And what's actually in writing in the visual dictionaries, The Art of the Force Awakens, actually proves that a lot of the stuff that J.J. Abrams set up in The Force Awakens was meant to happen in The Last Jedi. And a lot of people didn't get why Snoke died without getting to know Snoke's identity, which I kind of had a problem with that at first, but then I accepted that Snoke's character was never that important. And The Art of the Force Awakens wanted to make Snoke as far away from Palpatine as possible. And Pablo Hidalgo also says before you make any theories about Snoke and speculations about Snoke, you should read the Jedi Prince series. So pretty much the story was already told if you read the Jedi Prince series. I have not read the Jedi Prince series, but for those people, it's not canon. It's in Legends, but Palpatine had a grandson in those books. I think that it's Palpatine's son or grandson in those books, and and there was a similar story with Palpatine's grandson in the Jedi Prince series. But the Jedi Prince series is not canon, but it's pretty much a similar story to that. And the Sith Lord pulling the strings was always in the blueprint for a long time. Kathleen Kennedy even confirmed that Palpatine's return was in the blueprint for a long time. Now, Palpatine's return in The Rise of Skywalker was probably not something that George Lucas would have done, but George Lucas would have ended up having a Sith Lord pulling the strings in the shadows on top of the Jedi Killer and the Jedi Killer's master. So there would be the Jedi Killer and his master, who his master seduced the Jedi Killer to the dark side, but then there would be the Sith working in the shadows that existed outside of Darth Bane's order. But J.J. Abrams and Kathleen Kennedy made some changes and decided to replace that with Palpatine in the blueprint. So the Palpatine returning was entirely J.J. Abrams' decision. But as far as The Last Jedi goes, it took up the most inspiration from what George Lucas had in his story treatment, especially with the concept art about revolving around an older exiled Luke Skywalker from 2012, and this was before George Lucas sold Star Wars to Disney. So it was a much older exiled Luke Skywalker. Rian Johnson took up that much inspiration, and originally Rey, which would have been Kira, would have found Luke Skywalker in Episode 7 and also, not only that, by the end of the film, would have also convinced Luke Skywalker to get out of his depression and do something about the fight. And there would be more training with Kira and Luke Skywalker that would have taken place in Episode 8. Of course, Luke Skywalker probably still would have stayed on Ahch-To, but training Kira to become a Jedi, and realizing that Luke Skywalker realizing that he's no longer the last Jedi. So, but anyways, that was what was in the outlines, and Rian Johnson took up the most inspiration from that. So The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, we can safely say that it took up the most inspiration compared to The Rise of Skywalker. The Rise of Skywalker didn't really take up much inspiration from what Lucas had intended for the sequel trilogy with his treatment, but there was a lot of reasons for that as well, due to Carrie Fisher's passing. Plus, they had to rewrite Episode 9. Colin Trevorrow was originally supposed to be the writer and director of Star Wars Episode 9. But anyways, The Last Jedi did indeed took up the most inspiration from George Lucas's sequel trilogy treatments. But anyways, that's all I have to say for this video. Do make sure to smash a like, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you all later in another video.